From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Anne-Marie Horder.
The House voting on Republicans' Israel funding bill today, likely to pass, but dead on arrival in the Senate. This as a potential government shutdown looms now just about 2 weeks away.
Pressure rising on Senator Tommy Tuberville for his hold on military promotions, with Democratic leadership floating a possible rule change to push promotions forward.
We'll be joined today by Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland and by Maya MacGuineas, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So this is it, Anne-Marie. The new Speaker of the House held his first ever briefing today with reporters, and he's putting this piece of legislation on the floor knowing that Chuck Schumer won't even take it up next door in the Senate.
Well, exactly. And then we'll get this vote this hour. So we'll know that even if this passes, it's pretty much dead on arrival in the Senate. Let's take a listen to what senators had to say today on the emergency aid funding.
The Senate needs to move forward with a good bill that meets the needs of Israel and Ukraine.
We need to fund the Israel by itself, that it needs to be taken out. Otherwise, it's going to turn into a 3-week, 6-week journey up here. That Ukraine funding is controversial versus there's nearly unanimous on both sides that Israel needs the funding.
If we walk away from funding Ukraine, and the Russians Putin is successful in taking over Ukraine, it's basically a welcoming letter to the Chinese that they can go after Taiwan.
The Senate should defer to the House on this one. The House wants to move forward with the amount of money that the president requested.
The worst thing around here is this continued helter-skelter, childish play in the House where they're just playing games. It's why people don't like Washington.
Joining us around the table are Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisco and Jordan Fabian. All right, Jordan, let's start with you for a moment here. From a lot of these Republican senators, they actually sound like they're speaking from the same sheet as President Biden. The real issue is the House. How does this get done?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and there's not a clear path. But I will say that Speaker Mike Johnson gave up a lot of leverage by taking the path that he did, by not only putting Israel aid alone, but then requiring offsets for that spending. And so that's something that's deeply opposed in the Senate. Also, the president, the White House said today that they also would not sign a standalone Israel bill. So they're putting even more pressure on the Senate to deliver that combined package. But of course, the question is, can they get a combined package through the House? They'll need Democratic help for that, but will Speaker Johnson put it up for a vote? Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Tom Cole today said that the Senate bill wouldn't pass the House. Chuck Schumer says they won't take up the House bill in the Senate. So this is feeling like a little bit of a standoff. But as I mentioned, the Speaker did talk to reporters for the first time today at the podium. Here's Mike Johnson weighing in on Republican priorities in the House.
We have really healthy debates, even inside our own conference, sometimes about tactics, like every family does. But during a perilous time at home and abroad, we are united. And we're united in our pursuit of very clear objectives. We want to rein in reckless spending. We want to reduce inflation. And, of course, right out of the blocks here, as has been noted, we're going to support our close friend and ally, Israel.
So it kind of becomes a question here, I guess, Michelle, is if he's being allowed to get a win. He's going to get this out of his system, get something on the floor, and then maybe start working with Hakeem Jeffries, start working with Chuck Schumer. Or is this going to be the new path for this Republican conference?
Well, it remains to be seen, certainly, but it is a sort of statement bill, right? I mean,
yes.
This is the Speaker's first kind of, entree into his legislative agenda. It's definitely something that his small caucus is pushing for, is to separate that out. But as Jordan mentioned, I mean, this is a total non-starter. The veto threat remains from the White House.
Absolutely.
And, we heard from National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby today talking about how an urgent supplemental is urgent for a reason. They see 4 main components of that supplemental that the White House put forward. They don't want to see them pulled out, Ukraine, Israel, Indo-Pacific, and border security. They want them all in one package.
Pass, right?
Yeah, but inevitably you might see this kind of push closer to the November 17th deadline. And we're going to see more of these rounds of
Well, that's an
putting in
important
different
thing
legislation.
that you point out, and that's the idea of a shutdown, Anne-Marie. We're not even mentioning that yet.
I'm glad you brought that up, because what we also heard from Mike Johnson today was that he wants this ladder approach. So
Right.
maybe fund some
laddered
agencies.
CR.
Yeah, maybe fund some agencies,
I'm
but not
sorry.
all. So there's going to be multiple domino effects of potential shutdown. And then California Congressman Pete Aguilar, chair of the House Democratic Caucus, responded to that potential approach. Take a listen.
I don't know what a laddered CR does. They are already advancing appropriations measures that cut EPA and other agencies back to levels from 20 years ago. These are the things that Speaker Johnson has to advocate for to appease the most extreme members of his conference.
I thought the Mike Johnson was going to have a honeymoon period and they were going to allow him to do a CR. He even said himself, January, April. Now he's throwing in the mix a ladder approach, which I have to agree with Congressman Aguilar. What does that even mean?
Yeah,
Has it ever been done? Has it ever been done before?
Well, I think some people are referencing back to a time before, the past several years when there actually were separate appropriations bills, and we got through that. I think in some ways
supposed to be
that might
normal procedure.
And in some ways the old normal, yes. But we'll see if that's actually what he means in practice, and if that's something that might come to fruition. But
I don't think
it seems like a lot of people wouldn't
CR
find that,
counts as regular order. Jacob's ladder,
It's the
maybe.
new normal.
Jordan, what does Joe Biden say about this? Because he wants a CR to sign. Is that it?
Their bottom line has been, hey, we struck a budget deal back in May when we got this debt ceiling, and whatever happened to that?
This is the comedy portion of the program.
Exactly.
The debt ceiling deal, that was so we didn't have to do this.
Right, and so we have a template here, and I'll use a journalism analogy, which is when you're minutes to deadline, I'm not thinking about writing a complex anecdotal lead and a 1,000-word story.
Right.
I want to get something short out, and then we can figure out the rest later. But Speaker Mike Johnson seems to think the opposite, that he can gussy up this huge, complex, laddered CR with only 15 days left to a shutdown.
Easier.
Yeah, this is going to be challenging. At the same time, though, even though we are looking out, because this is really around the corner, and this is when the president's going to be at APEC as well, so foreign policy is going to continue to be on the agenda, especially Asia-Pacific and China with Xi Jinping there. The fact of the matter is, going into this weekend, this White House is squarely going to be focused on Israel because we have Secretary of State Antony Blinken headed there, and he's also going to Amman, Jordan. Let's take a listen to what he said discussing the war in Israel earlier today.
As democracies, the United States, Israel, other democracies have a responsibility to do everything possible to protect civilians who may be caught in harm's way. We will be talking about concrete steps that can and should be taken to minimize harm to men, women, and children in Gaza. And this is something that the United States is committed to.
All right, so Secretary of State there, he was just about to be wheels up. He's now headed to Tel Aviv, and then he's going to go to Jordan. This is a balancing act for this administration that is not calling for a ceasefire, Jordan, but they're calling for a pause.
Yeah,
what
look,
does that mean?
I think what it means is they want isolated stops to fighting so they can get hostages out or get a truck of aid in. But they don't want everyone to put down their guns full stop because they think that'll help Hamas. But they're also seeing a broader problem, which is, I sense that they're in war. There's the tactical war, and then there's the PR war. And Israel's fighting the tactical war, and it seems like the Biden administration doesn't think they're fighting the PR war smart enough by the number of civilian deaths, by the targeting of these refugee camps. And so Antony Blinken is going to go to Israel with a message of, hey, why don't we consider these pauses? Why don't we consider a more targeted approach that will root out Hamas and not cause a broader conflict in the region?
Seeing the headline today on the terminal that Israeli forces had encircled Gaza is making some people nervous about what might come in the next couple of days. We've heard about Joe Biden, hugging Benjamin Netanyahu so he can whisper in his ear. What's he going to be whispering ahead of this?
Well, certainly
weekend?
a very delicate balancing act because they're going to have to continue to say we're not getting in the IDF's way. The Israeli Defense Forces will do what they have to do. It's their right and responsibility to defend themselves, while at the same time pushing hard on all these humanitarian messages. I mean, up to and including the Islamophobia strategy released yesterday by the White House, talking about hate not being welcome in any form, whether on the anti-Semitism or Islamophobia. So they are trying to push these messages of, we don't want any civilian casualties. Every civilian casualty is a tragedy, and we want our Israeli ally to be careful about that. But they're not going to tell the Israelis, at least not publicly, what to do in tactical operations, and they're going to continue providing that military aid as they can.
Great to have both of you with us for a smart conversation. Thanks to Bloomberg's Michelle Jamrisco and Jordan Fabian on Balance of Power. Coming up, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland will be with us for the Senate's view on all of this when it comes to aid to Israel, Ukraine, and the border. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
Would you consider putting a bill on the floor that includes funding for Israel but does not have spending cuts, or is that a non-starter?
No, listen, we are in dire straits as a nation, and if you talk to leaders at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, sometimes even in recent years under oath, they've testified before the House Armed Services Committee, where I served until last week. If you ask them what the greatest threat is to our national security, you would expect, most people expect they'd say China, Russia, Iran, terrorism. They say it's the national debt.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson this morning ahead of the expected vote on aid for Israel, a bill that faces an almost certain doom in the Senate. After all, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he won't even take up that legislation, and we already know that the president says if it reaches his desk, he'll veto it. This is where we start our conversation with Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. Senator, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. Apparently this is going to happen, this vote to pass a standalone bill on Israel funding in the House. If it were to pass, would you vote for it in the Senate?
Good to be back with you.
We've got the Zoom gods with us here. You all right, Senator? No
Sorry
problem.
about that. So the short answer is no. This is a non-starter of the United States Senate because in addition to providing assistance to Israel, we also have to provide urgently needed assistance to Ukraine. What House Republicans are saying is they want to abandon the people of Ukraine to Vladimir Putin. Let them violate their sovereignty, take over the country and their democracy. And they're also trying to use this as an opportunity to allow very wealthy tax deadbeats, people who are not paying the taxes that are already due and owing, to get off the hook. So it's outrageous that they're using the attacks by Hamas to try to actually pass legislation that gives very wealthy tax cheats a way out and at the same time increases the deficit. This doesn't pay for anything. As the Congressional Budget Office indicated, their plan actually increases the deficit because they're taking away the ability of the IRS to enforce tax laws against very wealthy people.
So clearly this does sound like a political messaging bill from the House GOP, but at the end of the day, it is a Republican-run House. So somehow this deal needs to be sweetened to make sure you can get enough votes. The president said he won't even sign an Israel alone funding bill. So if you go back to his bigger ask, which included Ukraine, as you mentioned, as well as money for Taiwan and the southern border, are more Democrats willing to give in to some of these Republican demands when it comes to the U.S. southern border to make sure they can get this all-encompassing bill?
So Democrats support President Biden's request for additional funds for border security purposes, as well as Ukraine, Israel, and importantly, humanitarian relief and assistance for people in Gaza. So, yes, I think that Democrats will support the proposal that President Biden put forward, and I'm confident we would have a bipartisan majority in the United States Senate to get that done. In fact, in the House of Representatives, if the new speaker were actually to put that up for a vote and let democracy, small d, work its way, it would pass the House.
Speaking of democracy, small d, I have to ask you about this 5-hour escapade on the Senate floor last evening involving military promotions that we've talked about quite a bit here, even with the senator from Alabama, Tommy Tuberville, who's protesting the abortion travel policy at the Pentagon. A lot of folks have asked what it would take to break the blockade, Senator, and a lot of folks answered Republicans to turn on Tommy Tuberville. And it sure seemed like that started happening last night. Listen to Senators Joni Ernst and Lindsey Graham, and we'll have you respond.
They will be confirmed someday if we have the intestinal fortitude to do what is right by our military men and women who have absolutely nothing to do with the policy that was put in place by Secretary Lloyd Austin and President Joe Biden.
There's a reason this has not been done this way for a couple hundred years. No matter where you believe it or not, Senator Tuberville, this is doing great damage to our military. I don't say that lightly. I've been trying to work with you for 9 months. Folks, if this keeps going, people are going to leave.
The sense of frustration was palpable last evening as Tommy Tuberville himself objected to some of these votes, even though he said that he would go along with this if they were brought to the floor on an individual basis. 3 of them snuck through today, including the first female leader of the Navy. The admiral was confirmed earlier. Senator, what happens next here? Is Tommy Tuberville going to back down?
Well, yesterday was a very important moment because to date, you've seen a lot of Democrats in the Senate go to the floor and condemn Senator Tuberville's actions, which are putting our national security at risk and doing great harm to military families. But last night, as you just showed, we finally had 4 Republican senators go to the floor and make the point that many of us have been making. So we still don't know if Senator Tuberville will relent. Today we did the nominations through the normal course. We got cloture. We've had a final vote for 4 individuals, some senior officers in the services. But there are hundreds still to go. And as Lindsey Graham was pointing out there, for hundreds of years, we've done this by unanimous consent because we don't hold members of the military responsible for decisions that they have no control over. And that's what Senator Tuberville's doing. He's putting those military families at great jeopardy and putting our national security at great risk because he disagrees with the policy. The way to deal with that is to try to change the policy. Don't try to punish hundreds of our military servicemen and women.
If cloture votes were forced tomorrow and next week, as they were today, how long would it take to get those hundreds of officers approved?
Well, it would probably take a year. I mean, I don't know the exact amount, but this requires a huge amount of Senate time. We wouldn't be able to keep the government open. We wouldn't be able to work on the supplemental that we were just talking about, the emergency supplemental. We would have to devote our time only to these nominees. And even then, it would probably take up to a year to do hundreds of them if you eat up the amount of clock that's necessary, which is why we are looking now at a way to change the rules, at least on a temporary basis, to clear these hundreds of nominations. In order to do that, we will need 60 out of 100 Republicans. So last night was a good sign that maybe we're heading in the right direction to get a way around the Tuberville roadblock.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland joining us on a busy day. Coming up, Apple announces fourth quarter earnings, and among the details, a massive miss in China, coming in at $2 billion less than Wall Street had expected. Kaylee joins us next with the details. This is Bloomberg.
Been challenging all year. I think what will matter over the coming quarters is whether Apple can continue to execute on the current iPhone cycle and then, of course, launch new products next year and ultimately see a re-acceleration of growth in China. There are competitive dynamics with Huawei. We're watching that closely, and we'll have to see how that plays out.
Daniel Flax, a senior research analyst at Neuberger Morgan, reacting to Apple's challenges in China after the company reported results in the last hour. And Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons is here with more on the numbers. Kaylee, it's not doing too hot because of Beijing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The stock certainly isn't reacting positively. In fact, the losses just keep growing in the after-hours trade as the conference call is ongoing right now. The stock off right now by about 3.5%. What's interesting is Apple actually beat on the bottom line. Earnings per share came in at $1.46. That was above expectations. You had a little bit of a beat on revenue as well, though at $89.5 billion, that did represent the fourth consecutive quarter of sales declines. That is the longest slowdown we have seen for this company going back to 2001. And to your point, Anne-Marie, China is partially to blame. Greater China revenue came in almost $2 billion below Wall Street expectations, falling about 2.5% year on year. That's a bigger deceleration than expected and pretty crucial considering China makes up about a fifth of Apple's overall revenue. The issue in China for Apple is really multi-pronged. On the one hand, it is about the Chinese consumer, which hasn't really recovered post-COVID to the extent that many anticipated initially. The other thing is, if a consumer is looking to buy a new smartphone, if they work for the government, they may not want to buy an iPhone because the government has actually banned iPhones in a lot of buildings in China. But also, there's new competition out there. The Huawei Mate Pro 60 phone, which was just released in August, using a chip made in China by SMIC or SMIC that the U.S. is actually investigating because they have been trying to curb China's ability to develop that kind of semiconductor technology. And yet that phone is now out there in the market, and Apple is going to have to compete with that. Now, it's worth noting, Tim Cook did say on the call earlier that they did have a quarterly record in iPhone revenue for mainland China, but we have to keep in mind here that the iPhone 15 launched on September 22nd, so only about a week before this quarter was final. So it's more about the demand outlook going forward, and that's what they'll be running through on the call right now.
Is it hard or possible, I should say, to delineate between losses from the ban, from the government ban on iPhones and government installations and state-owned companies, or is it the Huawei phone, the new competition?
Well, that's where the color on the conference call is going to be really important. What kind of take-up are they seeing for the iPhone 15? Because, again, it only has been in the market for a very short period of time, and demand for that phone going forward is going to be ultra-critical, especially if they think it's because people are turning to other smartphones. The other thing I would note with Apple in China is it isn't just a demand problem. They have really integrated supply chains in China as well. This is where the vast majority of the world's iPhones are made. So it's an issue on both sides of the equation for Apple, and geopolitics certainly doesn't make it any easier for this company in terms of operations.
This is why all roads lead to India at the moment, right? When you look at
That's
Apple's
exactly right.
supply chain, manufacturing chain, that could be the future.
Yeah, that's the kind of friend-shoring that Janet Yellen often talks about.
Friend-shoring, indeed.
Diversifying, de-risking.
I like it.
Yeah.
Not decoupling.
Right, no, we're definitely not.
We're not decoupling.
Conscious decoupling. Bloomberg's Kayleigh Lines, we thank you. Coming up, Maya MacGuineas joins from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
They have 2 weeks. Congress has 2 weeks to do their jobs. As you just stated, they have 2 weeks to honor their word to avoid a shutdown. That's what they have to do. And the president said this when he signed the last continuing resolution. He said there's no excuse for another crisis. There really isn't. That's our message to them. There is no excuse.
Karine Jean-Pierre, earlier today, as pressure mounts on Congress to pass a budget before the November 17th deadline. Let's go now to Maya MacGuineas, president of Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Maya, before we begin, we have to congratulate you. 20 years today, looking after this country's debt. At the end, we'll get into exactly how much we've added to that. Yeah, so happy anniversary. I want to actually start with what's going on right now on the House floor. There's this Israel standalone bill. They're going to be voting on it. The CBO score came out, and they agreed with you. This would actually add to the deficit. For our audience who hasn't read through this, can you explain how this offset on rescinding money to the IRS can actually cost more?
Of course. So the first thing is that the House is saying in order to pay for emergency spending for something that they support, aid to Israel, we need to find offsets. And given our very bad fiscal situation, that 100% makes sense. Where the logic breaks down is the fact that the offset they've chosen is taking funding away from the IRS. And this funding is targeted to close something called the tax gap, which is taxes that are owed but are not paid. And so those resources were going to go to increase the collection of taxes in a way that actually generates more money than the cost. And so what the Congressional Budget Office has just confirmed that this would lead to actually making the deficit worse, not better. So thumbs up to the idea of paying for emergency spending, even if it's urgent and necessary. Our fiscal situation's bad, so it makes sense to pay for it. But a big thumbs down for doing so with a so-called offset, which actually would involve making the revenue situation and deficit worse.
Well, you know, when this CBO score came out, you're the first person we thought of. Anne-Marie quoted you yesterday, and I'd point you to the IRS commissioner. Daniel Werfel said this week these offsets would not only add to the deficit in the style that the CBO suggested, but would end up costing $90 billion because of the lower scrutiny on what he calls tax evasion at the highest levels of wealth. So confirming your point, Maya, I guess I would ask you, what other offsets would be acceptable? What would be preferred? Tom Cole today says there's all kinds of unspent money that could be used.
100%. I agree with that. In fact, we're putting out a list of potential offsets that could go for all of the spending that people are looking at for the end of this year, from Israel to Ukraine to the border. So let's just start with some specific policies. We could look at a number of areas of healthcare savings where there's, in fact, bipartisan agreement that we could get some savings out of health care. We could bring the spending caps that were agreed to in the Fiscal Responsibility Act down by just a tiny amount, or we could increase revenue. Say you have an offset revenue increase that just does a percentage across the board increase on income taxes or corporate income taxes. It would be well less than 1% that you'd need to offset the cost of these things. The basic point is you go back to the notion of budgeting. And what that means is if something's worth doing, it is worth paying for, how would you pay for it? If the House Republicans really want to focus on making it a little bit more political and taking away some of President Biden's recent initiatives, there are things they could look at. Again, the IRS money moves us backwards, but the student loan forgiveness issues that he has just put out, that could be one of the areas where there's additional savings and a policy that they didn't agree to. Offsets are hard. It means raising taxes or cutting spending. That's how you budget. And so it really is important we start looking at those. We'll continue to put more lists of offsets out through the coming weeks to help Congress if they actually are willing to pay for these things, which would be an important turnaround move on their part.
Today, we also heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson about the November 17th potential government shutdown. He talked about a ladder approach for continuing resolutions or to keep the government open. Do you think that could work?
You know, basically, there is the issue that Congress only moves with action-forcing moments. And what this would do is continue to put pressure points to make decisions to pass appropriations. And let me take a step back and say some of the requests that have come out of the House on all this, passing appropriations bills one at a time, not going to these big omnibuses that are filled with spending that people don't even have time to look at. These requests, going back to regular order and actually doing budgets, makes an absolute ton of sense. And the problem is they don't do regular order and they only make decisions by action forcing moments, which is why we end up having things like debt, government shutdown countdowns or government default shutdowns. We have to change our governing from crisis. So this solution to me seems like it's actually putting in more mini crises. And what I'd rather work at is overhauling our budget process so that we have plans we can actually stick to. Starting with, Congress needs to pass a budget every year. This year, the House Budget Committee did put a budget out of committee, but much, much later than the deadline. The Senate Budget Committee never even bothered to do a budget. So the real way to start this is insisting on the budget process, putting in place automatic changes if they fail to pass budgets. But I think sort of these arbitrary and ongoing deadlines where you have to make choices and they end up being political showdowns between the two parties don't do anything to the broader goals, which are get Congress to work again and work together, put us on a more fiscally responsible path, and try to unify the country instead of having, constant division and dysfunction coming out of Capitol Hill.
Well, it seems you've redefined the concept of job security here, Maya. Our producers have been working on the math while you've been talking as we celebrate, and I suspect there's a party happening in that next room to celebrate your 20th year on this job. 20 years ago, look at this, Anne-Marie.
Remarkable.
Under $7 trillion in national debt. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, we're about $33 trillion now. That's been quite a 20 years of work, Maya. When you're celebrating your 40th, where is it going to be?
Can we go with Instead of you've done a really terrible job, can we go with it would have been worse? It could have been worse. I don't know. And I will tell you, it has not been an impressive period in terms of our fiscal situation. And I do see there as a somewhat disturbing correlation. I hope it's not causation.
I guess it could always be worse.
Yeah, I guess you're right. It could always be worse. But in all seriousness, Maya, is the issue down to the fact of just too much spending, or is it actually legislatures do not want to go through the normal process that was there when you first started your job?
It's an excellent question. It's not about too much spending, because actually being fiscally responsible doesn't mean big government or small government. It means being willing to pay for the government you want. So if you are a big spender and you want a much larger government, you can be fiscally responsible as long as you're willing to pay for those programs. Just like you can be fiscally responsible and want a smaller government, but you can't get there by cutting taxes. You can only get there by cutting spending, and then you can cut taxes at the same time. The key is what we're doing in terms of borrowing. And right now we are in a bad habit of borrowing when we need to, like COVID or big recessions, but also borrowing when we don't need to. Under President Biden, under President Trump, both presidents oversaw huge run-ups of trillions of dollars in the national debt when the economy was strong and there was no economic reason to borrow. So what I would point out is that we are in the habit of both political parties doing things that are easy. They love to cut taxes. They love to grow spending. They don't like to pay for things, making up justifications, sort of the fiscal myths about why it's okay. And now I think the added challenge why things have gotten so much worse, in addition to the complete failure and breakdown of regular order, is that we are so polarized. Both parties really have a difficult time cooperating. The only time we can see bipartisan legislation, if it's you're borrowing on both sides. So I'll trade you my borrowing for your borrowing. And so we double down on borrowing, and we can sometimes have bipartisan bills. We really, for economic and national security reasons, need to return to a willingness to budget, pay for the initiatives we want. We can spend more if we're willing to tax more or spend less elsewhere, but not borrow in a way that is really undermining kind of the fiscal foundation of our country.
Maya, just very quickly, I don't mean to put you on the spot like this, but in your 20 years, who was the worst offender?
I can't. I would love to answer, but I'm not going to. See, I've finally learned to be diplomatic after 2 decades of this. There's more than one.
Is it a D or an R? There's more than one. Oh, boy. All right, let's do that.
Well, that's how we got to 33 trillion.
We'll do this offline. Maya, we're happy for you, and we thank you for being a friend of the program. Maya MacGuineas, happy 20, and thank you for talking with us on Bloomberg. Coming up, our political panel will be with us to go through the day's action in the House. Here we go. We're looking ahead of this vote on Speaker Johnson's Israel aid bill, a procedural vote on the way as we speak. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
I have been very consistent, intellectually consistent in this, and persistent that we have to follow due process and we have to follow the law. I do believe that very soon we are coming to a point of decision on it. We're in the impeachment inquiry phase, as you know, which is an important step in that due process.
Speaker Mike Johnson this morning in his very first briefing with reporters as Speaker. Let's assemble our political panel. Lauren Tomlinson, partner at Steer PR. John LeBombard, Senior Vice President at bipartisan public affairs firm Rock Solutions. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you both for being here. I'm not even sure where to begin, Anne-Marie. We've just covered the last hour talking about madness from a lot of different angles, but we should start with, I guess, the vote that's about to happen. Israel, standalone. The Senate says it's DOA. Joe Biden says he's going to veto it. What's the purpose of this exercise?
You know, it's really what I'm viewing it as is it's the new speaker's first test on how he can deliver for his caucus. And, you know, that was a very contentious speaker's debate, speaker's election, as we saw. And I think that there's a real question about his political ability to deliver for conservatives who put him in the speakership, but then also actually move the country forward and get stuff done. And so this is going to be his first first test. He could not go and immediately capitulate to the Democrats. He had to make some sort of conservative stand on this in order to even just bring along the Republican votes that he needs to get this done. So how it ends up getting negotiated, yet to be seen. Hopefully he knows that the caucus is really keen to support Israel funding. So.
Well, he's talking a big game on everything that he can get done. House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today sounding optimistic about the state of the Republican Party.
There is such a great feeling of esprit de corps amongst House Republicans. We're not only unified, we are energized. And part of the reason for that is that our members were allowed to go home for the weekend and do some district work, and everyone met with constituents. Most everyone got to go home at least for a couple of days. And they came back with reports, glowing reports about the sentiment that is felt out in the grassroots amongst the American people, and not just amongst Republicans, but amongst all Americans.
Okay, so he's sounding very optimistic about things that he thinks he can get accomplished on the floor. But to Joe's point, this is dead on arrival in the Senate. The president said not only will he not just veto an Israel bill that has this IRS pay for the shrinking of this money, but he's going to veto any Israel standalone bill. So how are Democrats going to be able to work with this individual who thinks he has a winning plan?
Well, it's a great question, and Lauren's exactly right about the political calculus that all of these party leaders are facing right now. There's a lot of pressure on our new speaker to deliver, as Lauren said, for the conservatives who helped put him into this job. But what we have seen time and time again is that these maximalist positions do not deliver for the American people. So my hope is that the new speaker can really thread this needle, deliver whatever he needs to his base. But that hinders progress domestically, and the stakes are exponentially higher when we're talking about our strategic allies that are facing existential threats to their security.
Is this about the pacing of passing things? We've tried to get to this a couple of different ways, Anne Marie. Is it the offsets, or is it the fact that it's standalone? And we asked Debbie Wasserman Schultz that earlier today, the Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, talked to us about it on Bloomberg Sound On. Here she is.
I don't think it should be a single subject. I think the whole package should come, but it certainly makes it deeply problematic to put it on the floor when he has a pay-for that blows up the deficit, that sets a dangerous precedent, and that is grossly irresponsible.
So, John, is it the idea that other things cannot get passed unless they're all bundled together and everyone has a piece of this, or it takes too long, or is this just politics?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I would say that if the new speaker and the Republican majority in the House want to have the critical conversation about getting America's fiscal house in order and fiscal responsibility, I honestly think that's a conversation that quite a few Democrats in the House and Senate would like to have. I come from a long line of proud, moderate Democrats who enjoy having that conversation. But we have strategic international allies who are facing existential threats right now, so time is of the essence for both Israel and for Ukraine.
Actually, the vote is taking place right now on the House floor. So in a few minutes, hopefully we'll know exactly how that outcome happened. But, Lauren, what needs to be in the bill for Republicans to vote for it if this ends up being dead on arrival, which we know in the Senate and the White House? Is Democrats going to have to maybe come in a little bit more when it comes to the southern border? Is that the place where we can actually see compromise?
I think so, and I think that was the White House's original approach to this, was they brought in Michael McCaul, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and they said, all right, what do we need to do to get this passed? And that was where kind of they negotiated the Ukraine, Israel, and southern border funding and packaging those together as something that the caucus might actually go for. I think a lot has happened since then, and, obviously that's changed. So, I mean, I actually see that they're just going to keep pushing, I wouldn't say clean, because I'm sure they're going to attach random things to it, but standalone bills as the way forward. And it may be that the White House just needs to approve these one by one, because I don't know that they'll actually be able to package these together. Ukraine and southern border funding, maybe, but I actually think Israel could just pass on its own.
How about that? Well, we may be about to find out, Anne Marie. They do have the votes, if you're looking at your screen here, the votes to pass this standalone Israel aid bill. So the new Speaker of the House has a win on the board, but what happens next? You are a creature of the Senate. John, is the Senate going to step up here and jam the House now?
I have a feeling that that's the direction we're headed right now, which is discouraging, if nothing else, for the people who badly need these resources. I would say when it comes to these vital investments in the security of our international allies, as well as the security to address the mess on our southern border right now, more is good. So packaging these together, doing them as standalone pieces of legislation, it's up to our party leaders, and that's kind of why they get the big bucks here. They need to come together and figure out the best path forward on all of these pieces.
We just have the full vote. They said it's passed 226 to 196. And John, I have to ask you, 10 Democrats voted for this.
The House will come.
That can be politically challenging for them. This rescinds that IRS money that was a key part of Biden's Inflation Reduction Plan.
Yeah, well, look, based on my professional experience, I can say honestly that our party is Big Tent. We have a variety and a diversity of opinions as it comes to fiscal matters. I would say, look, this is probably more an expression that aid needs to get to Israel, and that's probably what we'll see a lot of these Democrats saying, no matter what the sort of pay for or lack of pay fors are in that legislation. At the same time, I have to say, again, if we're going to have a conversation about fiscal restraint or fiscal responsibility in the federal government, I would prefer that pay for not be something that actually adds to the deficit. I think that will probably be the harder messaging challenge on this on the part of the Republicans.
Steve Scalise is dealing with some scheduling matters here on the floor. If you're just joining us, the standalone bill with aid for Israel has just passed the House of Representatives, and we are live here with view of the House floor. So, Lauren, I guess I'm curious, does this now embolden this new speaker after getting a win, or does it make him more likely to work with Democrats to try to get something turned into law?
He's very motivated to get something turned into law. He was telegraphing during his press conference today that he wanted to get on the phone with Schumer and work this out, which is a great step, right? So while I think, again, that he had to deliver politically for his base and make sure that that his base knew and that the Republican caucus knew that he was fighting for them and that he was committed to fiscal responsibility, I think that everyone is very motivated to get this aid to to Israel first and foremost. And I think that is going to take priority over any domestic politics.
And what happens with the aid to Ukraine, though? Can this speaker get that done, given how the Republican Party is pretty much divided on this? Not all members, but a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them are. And I think, that there's an isolationist aspect to this, that they're really saying, how much, how long, and what does this actually do for us? The Ukraine aid is going to be harder. I do think, though, especially in the Senate, there is great will to get that done. We probably will need to have that paired. And I think the White House is right that if they pair that with border security, that makes it easier for people to swallow. But, another thing, this is emergency supplemental funding. So the White House actually has funding that they can give Ukraine and Israel that is already authorized right now. So we're not leaving our allies completely high and dry, which is good. But we do need to continue to send the strong signal that we are going to push back on Russian aggression. We are going to push back on, outrageous terrorist attacks and support our allies in the Middle East. And I think the supplemental spending, regardless of what the number ends up being and what the negotiation ends up being, the fact that we pass it and the fact that we support our allies is going to be the bigger signal to our adversaries.
So let's play a little 3D chess here, John. This goes to the Senate. If so, maybe there is a phone call with Chuck Schumer. We've also got a government shutdown in 2 weeks. Could a grand deal be made here? Say, sure, you know what? We'll take that standalone Israel bill. We're going to send you something on Ukraine, but we're going to give you Democrats to do it if you don't fool around with this laddered CR and give me a continuing resolution that gets us through the end of the year. What about it?
I hope so. I hope all options are on the table. Again, these sort of extreme positions of give me everything or I won't accept anything, that doesn't deliver what's needed for the American people.
There would be Democrats needed to pass this Ukraine funding, right? He's going to need the whole caucus, possibly.
Absolutely.
Conference.
And I think they could get there. As you said, time is of the essence. We've got a couple of weeks here and mounting crises. I've been heartened, I have to say, about what I've heard the new speaker say in terms of Ukraine funding, in terms of Israel funding, and the fact that he wants to get at least a continuing resolution done to keep the government operating for the American people. But if there's a willingness to play whatever base politics are necessary, but then step away from those maximalist positions to actually compromise, then I think there's a path forward for all of this to get done, but it is a very tall order.
Well, you mentioned you've heard what he had to say about Israel and Ukraine, and you were heartened by it. Well, let's remind our audience, this is House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today discussing Israel with reporters.
Last week, in one of my first acts as Speaker, we passed a resolution reaffirming our commitment to Israel in its moment of peril. And now, as Israel begins the next phase of its war, it's been kind of disturbing to us. I've heard Democrats suggest that there needs to be a ceasefire. Let us be clear. We've been very clear about this. There was a ceasefire. It was before October 7th, and Hamas broke it.
So his views on Israel are very clear. He was able to pass this bill. We just saw it on the House floor. When he goes in for his next White House meeting, does he have more power now? Because everyone was saying how this was going to be such a weak speaker.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly gives him a leg up to show that he can get something through the House. This was a first test. I think he passed it. But the real test that matters... With 12 Democratic votes, it's ticking up as we sit. But the real test is, can he deliver something that can get passed into law? That's what the party leaders, again, sort of get the big bucks for. It's not just passing a messaging bill that your base will support, and even that can earn some bipartisan support. There's a Democratic Senate, there's a Democratic White House, so the president and his team, Senator Schumer, and the new speaker have to get together to get this done.
So what are the next couple of weeks going to look like here with November 17 on our calendars? Is this going to wait till the last minute, or might something emerge before we're making plans?
Yeah, I think the last minute, per usual with Congress. But you know, they are working on it, at least. Like, now that we have the speaker, you know, I think I was on here a couple weeks ago being like, step one, you know, get a new speaker. And then, like, let's talk about everything else.
Box checked.
Box checked. They have got a speaker. So, you know, now at least the process can move forward. And I think that's he's indicated today in his press conference that work has already been done. But as we know with all of these things, it's extremely complicated negotiations. And we're going to have more fiscal responsibility demands and conversations with the CR. And so I think that's where you're going to get a lot of last-minute negotiating.
Is that why he mentioned the latter approach today to the continuing resolution? Because it went from January or even April, he was willing to keep the government open, and now it might be a bit more piecemeal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's finding that there's a lot of concern about our national debt. And as every request, you know, the Ukraine plus Israel, it's $100 billion. And I think that is a big number for conservatives to swallow without offsets. So you're going to see that if that conversation does not happen with these supplementals and we're able to pass things cleanly, that will come back during the CR discussion.
Just wait for the conversation about offsets for that Ukraine money. We'll be talking about that here for a while, right? Lauren Tomlinson, John LaBombard, great conversation, a great panel. We thank you for the insights. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. We'll see you here tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.